I think that was a fly that just left because the noise is too bad. In this video, I finally got my hands on a Trekka, and I've dressed for the occasion. You have to do these things properly. This is New Zealand's only production car. Yep, this is the closest New Zealand ever got to building its own car. This is the famous Trekka, and notice even got a Trekka number plate, which is particularly apt. It's a fascinating tale of how New Zealand tried to sort of join in with the motor industry, and you know, it looks a bit amateurish and like someone has done a very poor copy of a Land Rover, but remember why the Land Rover looks how it does. It looks that way because flat panels are simple to make, and there is no motor industry here. A bit of local assembly perhaps, but no body presses or anything like that. So coming up with something too adventurous, simply not going to happen. They didn't have that choice. So the body is Kiwi built, all steel body. The glass fibre roof is also Kiwi built. Under the skin, it is pure Skoda Octavia. I hope it's Octavia and not Octavia. I'm not from the Czech Republic. I cannot confirm or deny, but I shall try and say Skoda to keep the Skoda people happy. That's the original Skoda Octavia, which means we've got a little 1.2 litre engine up front producing about 50 brake horsepower, independent front suspension, independent rear suspension by swing axles, our old favourite, which is why the rear wheel is tucking under somewhat. That's just because of the simple geometry of the swing axle. The styling is very clearly inspired by Land Rover in terms of the front wing shape, and earlier models even had a split windscreen. But yeah, we'll take a closer look. We'll take in some of the delightful touches of this Trekka. Will I tell you the history of this car? It was developed in the mid 1960s, and like I say, Kiwis were keen to build their own car, fed up of importing other people's, and because cars had to come from so far away, they were always very, very expensive, so very exclusive. There weren't many light commercials available in the 1950s, and that situation only got worse when Jowett went bankrupt, because the Jowett Bradford was assembled here in fairly significant numbers, which is why I've seen so many in scrapyards. The mud flaps are neatly disguising how the swing axle rear suspension works. We'll get to that in a bit, but oh yeah, I'm not meant to go that way. The front wheel hasn't got a hubcap on it. Various manufacturers were approached, but Skoda, despite hiding behind the Iron Curtain back then, were actually quite keen to supply entire running gear, because again, the Kiwis had no way of building engines or transmissions. So the complete chassis of the Octavia Kombi was shipped from Czechoslovakia, as it still was back then, and then these bodies were built, and Skoda engineers came over to help with obviously all the mounting points, getting the controls to work, that sort of thing. Apparently the chap who came over from Skoda, his son is now head of the museum collection in the Czech Republic, and fittingly they have one, maybe two Trekkas over there. They seem quite proud, despite the fact it isn't a Skoda body. But yeah, it's quite a charming vehicle, but ultimately wasn't successful. It had a couple of good years at the late 1960s. It was introduced, launched in late 66, and you know, through to 69 it was still selling reasonably well. But then the government opened up the market a bit more, so there was more competition coming in. Companies began to locally assemble better vehicles, to be honest, and the rather dated underpinnings started causing people to run away. It's fairly fragile in places. The little 1.2 litre engine is not going to give you much grunt. People were buying them to try and use them as Land Rovers, and they're just not Land Rovers. Land Rovers have big beefy beam axles, and under here we have a swing axle, and you can see how it works. The drive shaft is in this tube, and that tube pivots on the diff. So the diff is fixed to the chassis, and the axle pivots like so. This is why the rear geometry on these swing axles is somewhat iffy, because as the car goes up, that wheel will only tuck in more, so it'll lean more that way as the vehicle goes up, and as it goes down, as it rolls into a corner, the geometry will improve up to a point. Wheel tuck can happen where the wheel tucks right underneath the car, which is undesirable. But having said that, I'm not sure that will happen on this as much as it will in others, because we've got a transverse leaf spring for the springing medium, which might add an element of stability in that regard. I can't promise it, but that's what I'm going to assume. Simple drum brakes do a reasonable job of stopping you, I should imagine. And just in case you forget, it's a Trekka. It's a Trekka. So this one was apparently a prototyping some improvements like a larger windscreen, but apparently a slightly smaller cab. And so we've got simple flat sliding glass for the windows, just like my Reliant Fox in fact. Fuel filler is here. There's a few other neat features on the outside, just because the previous owner apparently liked his camping, so he's got wiring for that, and we'll look at stuff inside soon. Someone's also screwed on these gutter rails, very common on Reliants to do similar, probably not screws, but just stick them on so water doesn't drip in while you've got the window open on a rainy day, or when you're getting in and out of the vehicle. The door latches are simple affairs, but you know, they work. But as you can hear, it's a very tinny car, which is perhaps not surprising. Here we got a pair of vinyl seats in finest luxury. Oh, beautiful. Little horn ring on the steering wheel. This is our indicator stalk. The two positions thusly, lights, like so. Oh, is that 4 positions? Was that a main beam on there as well? See, side, head. No, just 2 positions. I wonder where the main beam there is then, because there's no dip switch under here. That's the starter. Apparently, oh, there's a dip switch. It's right there. That's an unusual place for it. So that'll be main beam operation, pedals as you'd expect. But yeah, apparently they couldn't make the wiring work for right-hand drive. So we've got the ignition on a key, although the key keeps spinning around. So there's our ignition showing charge and oil. And yeah, here's the gearbox sticking out, because the previous owner seems to have modified the tunnel and the boot won't fit. I need to talk about that, so let's jump aboard. And you can see the windscreen's enormous, so visibility is really quite good. And the previous owner also liked his little text machine. I've forgotten what they're called now. I've even got one, but yeah, he liked all this stuff, so at least I know what everything does. Wipers. Oh, 2-speed. Oh, there's the washer as well. We'll get to those. Choke, just to help with cold running. Demister. Don't really understand that. And don't know what that does either. No, I'm not going to worry about that. That's quite dirty. The gear lever, you'll note, shows the positions first, second, third, fourth, and reverse. It's a reverse pattern, but actually this is a rebuilt gearbox, and it actually has the conventional patterns. And maybe Skoda changed that at some point, so it is now conventional. And you can see the selector mechanism at work. We're in first at the moment, second, third, fourth, and reverse is over there somewhere. It won't quite go into reverse at the moment. It's not a particularly joyous gearbox, unfortunately. Water temperature gauge is a very decent addition to add to things. Let's try the wipers while we're here. If I can get the there we go, get the ignition on. Washing is at your own risk and strength. Oh, what is it with Kiwi vehicles? Apparently screen wash is not part of the MOT here, or the WOF as it actually called. So no, that doesn't seem to work. We'll just put the wipers on. That's an interesting mechanical noise, and they don't park all that well, but I suppose it is a dry screen. This one also lifts up rather alarmingly, but I think you can actually adjust the spring tension, so there is hope there. We might be able to sort something out. Little interior light, which doesn't work. Sun visors, utilitarian, but of course the roof comes off, so that's good. But yeah, assembled in New Zealand by Motor Industries International Limited. After the demise of Jowett, that company started importing Volkswagens, including the Kombi, and then they sort of went to a Motor Industries International Limited name because they started bringing all sorts of cars in, including Simcas and Fiats, and then started building these. So they just went for a more generic name. But yeah, it's all simple, it's all bare metal. There is not much sound deadening going on in here. It is loud, as we shall discover. But let's have a peek in the back. Well, the top half lifts up easily enough. The bottom half is more problematic. We've got to turn this round to that position. There we go, and that comes off. And same over here. Or maybe the other way. One of the ways it will work, I'm sure. There we go. And now we can drop the tailgate, which is on chains. That is hopelessly impractical, but nonetheless we're in, and we can see we've got two tank handles down there, a nice very loose fitting rear seat, but actually you could fit a few people here. They'll have to be a bit friendly with the interlocking knees, but sometimes that's how new relationships are made. I've actually got enough headroom, although I suspect once I start bouncing down the road, that's going to start getting a bit painful. You can see the fiberglass work here, and also the previous owner's hilarious fuse board. This is amazing. I think Todd needs to fit, the owner of this vehicle needs to fit a light bulb immediately. But yeah, we can turn on the power, but oh, seat falls off, but without being connected up it isn't going to do anything. But still, I admire his yeah, this seat doesn't seem to be fitted all that well. Yeah. There we go, that seat is fitted almost completely now. If this is starting to look like it isn't a very good vehicle, then I'm afraid there is a certain amount of truth to that. They had a go, but there is an awful lot that could be a lot better. We will notice that it's got this aftermarket rear window heater fitted. I didn't see a switch for that, but a nice nod to older times. Gonna have a poke around under the bonnet, if we may. We pull that, and then there should be a secondary catch. Yes, there is a secondary catch. There we go. And it even springs up out the way. That's quite advanced. So here is the little 1.2 litre overhead valve engine. We can see the steering box is down here as well. Lovely, fairly straight shaft coming in, so if you have a front end that the steering wheel impales you, that's all good. Or maybe it's collapsible, you never know. Some interesting wire. Oh, that'll probably be for the horn, I imagine. Yes, it is, because you can see the wire going all the way to the horn. So yeah, you press it, complete the connection, that just rubs on the steering column to make a connection. That's quite amusing. I don't know if the original Skoda was like that. Big radiator, little top hose, so easy to work on. This dingy little manifold, but just not very potent, I shouldn't think. Inlet manifold only seems to have 2 ports going into the head. Presumably they're just shared, going into a pair of cylinders. And we can see the engine number, the body number, manufactured by Motor Industries International Limited, Otahuhu, New Zealand. And there we go. Right, I think we're done under there. Come down, little bonnet. Beautiful. Right, let's go for a drive. Right, we shall start the engine. There we go, I have to reach all the way down here. And the little engine fires very sweetly into life. We've got the charge light on because it's a dynamo, it's not charging sufficiently these revs. If I raise the revs, the light goes off. You probably can't even see that from where you are, but nonetheless that's what's happening. I shall try and find first gear, which is always a challenge. That's reverse, so that should be first, and then I've got to try and reverse is next to second, so you have to be a bit careful not to hit it by mistake. So off we go. There we go, that's second. Yeah, gearing is short, that's 20 miles an hour there. See if I can get second on the downshift. Yes, success. Quite heavy steering, given there's not much weight, but nonetheless it works. It's a very old school noise, isn't it, for the 1960s? It really does feel like 1950s technology. But low gearing means I can just leave her in third. And at 30 miles an hour we're into top. I think it's a 50 km/h speed limit here, so we'll take it easy. Just give those wipers another go. Yeah, there they go. Put them. I think that one needs adjusting just a little. The ride is a little bouncy. We have got a leaf spring at the back, of course, coil spring suspension up front. But it's not actually too loud. It's a bit echoey in here. Oh, there we go. We can go up to 80 now. That'll be quite fast enough. 80 kilometers an hour. Wiper is starting to dance. Yeah, 50 miles an hour is about all you want to do, really. I think the brakes are all drum and they're not actually too bad. Probably wouldn't want to hit them too hard too many times. So I'll find first gear again. There we go. I'm finding my way around the gearbox now. But yeah, she's not geared for highways, and I think that was probably one of the problems. I think in the sort of mid-60s, still a lot of very old British cars on the road. So in context, this isn't as bad as it may seem. But I think move on a bit, and yeah, this is going to date quite badly, really, isn't it? And it's so loud, there's no refinement, and yeah, it was never going to be a huge success. They built in the end about 2,500 Trekkas, but by the early 70s production had dwindled to nothing, and it was only going to get worse because Skoda had stopped making the Octavia, so where were the mechanical bits going to come from? So ultimately the Trekka was a dead end, but looks rather like Postman Pat's van. We seem to have, oh, there we go. That feels a bit like fuel starvation to me. Maybe I shouldn't trust the fuel gauge so much. And that loss of momentum has meant I've now got a cyclist to deal with. I'm not going to try and overtake a cyclist on a blind hill with so little power. Puke Road. Nice. There we go. He was definitely doing under 10 miles an hour, so we were well within our rights to do that. Oh, I feel the antiquated rear suspension there. Oh, take it steady through the bends. Yeah. Noisy, isn't she? Please don't pull out in front of me. Thank you. I think that was a fly that just left because the noise is too bad. Certainly gets plenty of attention wherever it goes. The gearbox is improving as it warms up, it must be said. And as I get used to it. It's quite a long way down, bit of a stretch. Your hand doesn't naturally fall on it. But this is decent enough, isn't it? Yeah, I admire New Zealand for having a go. Typical Kiwi ingenuity, how to create something out of nothing at all. Just no motor industry at all. Yeah. It was a good attempt, and I hope that doesn't sound too patronising. I don't want it to sound patronising. I want you to remember that creating a motor industry from scratch is not something you do just by flicking a switch. Ultimately, New Zealand decided to just keep assembling other people's cars instead. The Japanese manufacturers came here in strong numbers. But even that's all gone now. By the late 70s, that was kind of doomed. I think Toyota kept making cars here until the mid 80s, but yeah, all that's gone now. Now it's just imports. I'll tell you what though, this may not be the best car I've ever driven, but I'm still ever so pleased to be here. Just the spot for me, I think. Oh, no synchro mesh on first. It's still a very charming drive. I certainly wouldn't want to drive all the way to the South Island in it. But yeah, it's an important part of Kiwi history, and it very much celebrates the Kiwi ingenuity. And yeah, it's a bit dismal in places, but charming. It makes such characterful noises. Yeah, you're not doing bad. So that was the Jolly Trekka. The only vehicle built in any sort of numbers here in New Zealand. I was going to say from scratch, but it still isn't from scratch because it's got someone else's chassis, but still it's an important car, and it may not be a very good car, it may not be the best I've ever driven, but this is Hubner and we celebrate cars like this anyway. We're glad such vehicles exist. We're glad people are restoring them. This one is for sale, by the way, with an asking price of 21,500 New Zealand dollars. So if you're interested, then I will include some details below. But this could be yours, and you could have your own unique slice of Kiwi ingenuity. I say unique because this has a few mods on it that make it a bit different. And that's not just limited to how it came out of the factory either. I completely forgot to mention that the previous owner made his own wooden overriders. Brilliant. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed that as much as I have. Cars don't have to be brilliant to be fun. They can just be unusual and have interesting history behind them as well. And at the end of the day, it's still got me where I wanted to go, albeit some slight fuel starvation issues, but we made it. And I don't think those are down to the design of the car. Something is slightly amiss, as they often can be with beautiful old cars. So I shall say, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for watching all of my New Zealand adventures. This is perhaps the crowning glory, something I've been waiting for 3 months to get my hand on a Trekka. And yeah, don't forget you can head to the Hubnut store and buy all the Hubnut merchandise. And yeah, I shall see you in a future video. Farewell. I've got a special Brucey bonus for you. The owner has this original brochure for the Trekka, which is fascinating. All the different layouts you could have: full canvas soft top, just a cab, so you could have got a pickup, open wagon by just taking the roof off, it just bolts on, station wagon with rear doors, and you could have a single rear door, which would be a lot more practical than this rather frustrating tailgate. You could have a rear canvas, you could just have a chassis cab, you could do it all. But the best bit is, this is for farmers. Look how ideal it is for farming, despite the fact it's only got 2-wheel drive. Contractors, build roads with your Trekka, or sportsmen, go to the beach with your exotic lady who's not allowed to drive, but she can stand on the sill like that. It's fascinating and remarkably purple. There you go, the hardy Trekka in many exotic locations. Jeepers, you've got to go some to tow a boat. Blimey. So that's a lovely period item. And there we get the specifications. I have discovered reverse gear is an awful lot lower than first gear. I don't know if that's to make it better going up hills or something, if you have to reverse up them, but seriously, it's like being in low range gear in a Land Rover. It's that low. Yep, so synchromesh only on second, third and fourth. 47 brake horsepower they claimed at 4,500 revs. They reckon it's got a top speed of 69 miles an hour, but it felt frenetic enough at 50. So 7.5-inch minimum ground clearance. A fully enclosed drive shaft. Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't noticed that one. Trekka green and autumn gold are the standard colours, and you can yeah, you can have different ones. Passenger sun visor is extra. Luxury. There we go. Power brakes you could have as well. So a brake servo, or a brake booster if you're American. Windscreen washer was on the optional extras list. Upholstered rear seats, tow bar. Great stuff.